Throughout the ages, man has endeavoured to shape and to carve and to harness the forces of nature. Some evidence of these efforts lay around us. A fine example of this stands close to this very spot, having withstood the ravages of time and forming almost a part of the very mountain itself, standing in its solitary splendour, is Dolbaden Castle. Dolbaden was built by order of Llywelyn the Great. Llywelyn the Great, Prince of Wales, way back in the 13th century. Its key strategic position at Llyn Padan gave the garrison the unique advantage of blocking any advances to this sector of the country. Following the demise of Llywelyn the Great, the castle served for a further 4 decades or more, during 20 years of which Owain Goch was cruelly incarcerated by his younger brother, Llywelyn the Last. When the famous Owain Gwyndor, Prince of Wales, led the Welsh uprising in the early 1400s, the castle continued to serve as a holding for prisoners. It was nigh on 400 long years before new industries began to rapidly develop in the form of the now famous slate quarries back in the early years of the Industrial Revolution. In 1787, De Norwich Quarry was operating in a serious way. De Norwich Quarry was one of the largest slate quarries in the world, along with Penrhyn Quarry. In the mid-19th century, De Norwich was a vast and profitable business. At its peak, the quarry employed over 3,000 men. The Penrhyn Quarry was owned by Richard Pennant. He opened that quarry back in the 1780s. Pennant set the pace for slate quarrying in North Wales. The De Norwich quarrymen came from all over Carnarvonshire and Anglesey, but the majority came from the surrounding villages such as Dainleon, Llanberis and Llanrug. The De Norwich quarry was opened by Thomas Ashton Smith Sr. He inherited the vinyl estate in the 1690s. In the late 1700s, he leased the quarry to 2 men for 21 years. Smith realised that the quarry was becoming a viable concern and took the business over. When Thomas Ashton Smith died, he left the estate to his son, who was also called Thomas. The vinyl estate, at the peak of the slate industry, amounted to 38,000 acres of snowdonia. In the 1800s, he sold his Cheshire inheritance for £20,000 and began improvements at the Vinyl Hall. Tom Smith Jr. died in 1858 and the estate went to his wife. She then left it in trust to her husband's great nephew, George Duff. The Duffs legally adopted the name Ashton Smith in order to inherit the estate. George and his brother Charles, who succeeded him, had great interests in animals. Charles was interested in racehorses, and 3 of his horses won the Grand National. Sir Charles died in 1914. Sir Michael Duff, Charles's grandson, kept the estate running. In 1984, the park went up for auction. The Dinorwig quarrymen worked the quarry with gunpowder, crowbar, chisel, hammer and sheer skill. The men blasted and coaxed the slate from the mountain. They would climb up rock faces on a hemp rope and drill into the rock. They would then fill the hole with black powder, which was the explosive. The quarrymen would then place a fuse in the powder and light it. After the blast, the quarrymen returned to clear the rubble and prize the slabs loosened by the blast.
Ar yr inches bach o'n i gweithio yn chwarae. Pan dechreuais i, o'n i'n eitha stocar yn gwylod y gwaith ar JRM. JRM, honnodd o fwyaf o'n oedd efo chi cario'r cerig o Hafod Dwan y chwarae i Gilfach Ddu. Oedd yn had o gweithio yn Gilfach Ddu, oedd o'n flodio nhw'n i'r ceir mewn ffordd yna. Geir mawr, 4 wagan ar bob car de, mynd lawr i Felin Heli. Wel, ni'n gweithio fy siwysio, top o chwarael cycreinia fi de, ar o dador armi de, top o chwarael dreifio fanna de. Ni'n cario'r stwff, yr sledidian o'n alw de, cerig i lawr i gatar yn clains yma de, di gwllwn lawr yn clains de, i boncis a braich. Fanodd un o'r sediau mwyaf de, gweithio'r cerig. Llond y lleol lwch de. Doedd nhw'n llifio'r cerig i gwahanol seisis a falle de. Bydd nhw'n alw sledidiawn, oedd i lawr i'r shed, wedyn nhw'n hogia rhoi nhw ar y byrddau llifio. Wedyn nhw'n beth yn en, llifio nhw fanno, wedyn nhw'n alwch llond y llew. Bydd nhw'n troi mewn dŵr ond llond i gonda de. A dyna beth yw'r effaith ar y llwch yma ar y hogia yma de. Hwna'n toilet sa'n byd o de. Hwna'n math o toilet sa'n byd o de. Lle folchi na'n byd de. Hwna'n byd yn facilities o gwbl de.
The slate was then placed on wagons, which were pulled by a small train on the gallery to the top of the incline head. The wagons would travel down the inclines on rails to the bottom. The weight on the wagons would haul the empty wagon back up the incline. Sometimes the quarryman would catch a ride up. Another way of transporting slate was the Blondin ropeways, a multi-wheel, 2-part trolley which was pulled up and down the aerial slope by means of a winding rope. These Blondin ropeways were used on the galleries and towers, were built to lift the aerial wire and gain the necessary headroom for load handling. The slates were transported in wagons down the inclines to the great sheds below. At the sheds, they were sawn, dressed and split into slates. Slate sawing was a hard job and the men would have to work in heavy dust. This would lead to chest diseases such as TB. When all the slate was transported down the mountain to Gilfach there, which was the heart of Dinorwig Quarry, the slate was then transported on the Padan Lake Railway to Penskines, near Port Dinorwig.
Mae'r llechi, neu mi oedd y llechi, yn cael ei cludo o'r Gilfach Ddu i lawr i'r Felin Heli ar y tren mawr. Mi fydda'r tren yn cychwyn o'r Felin Heli yn y bora am 4:45 ac yn pigo Cerbyda i fyny, dechrau'n Penskines, wedyn yn Bethal, wedyn yn Bontrythall, wedyn yn Brynrefal ac yn cyrraedd Llanberis tua 7:00 y bore. mi fydda'r tren wedyn yn dod â ryn oedden nhw'n galw o lechi. Lle'r oed y cerbyda y tren fawr yn cymeryd 4 wagan bach o lechi. Ac wedyn oedd yn dod lawr i'r Pensgoins, neu Benfyn Clen fel ni'n galw, a wedyn oedden nhw'n cael ei gwffwng i lawr yn ein clen i'r cei. Mi fydda'r tren yn mynd yn ôl o gwmpas hanner dydd i wneud ail ryn, a mi fydda'n ôl yn byntia 3 i hanner 3. Reit, mi fydda'r llechi dod lawr yr un clen i wylod yr un clen. Yn fanno, mi fydda'n nhw'n cael ei pwyso ac unwaith eto yn cael ei cyfri. Dwi'n ni'n sawl gwaith fydda'r llechi yn cael ei cyfri. Fydda'n nhw'n cael ei cyfri tua 2-3 gwaith yn y chwaral. Oedden nhw'n cael ei cyfri wedyn cyn mynd ar y tren. Ar ôl cyrraedd y Felinheli, oedden nhw'n cael ei cyfri wedyn. Pe oedden nhw'n cael ei peilio ar y cei, mi oedden nhw'n cael ei cyfri wedyn. Pe oedden nhw'n cael rhaid yn y llong, mi oedden nhw'n cael ei cyfri wedyn. A dyna oedd hanes o lechan. Pe fydda'r llong yn dod i mewn, fydda'r llong yn dod i mewn dydwch fory. Wel, diwrnod cynt, mi fydda isio casual labour, hobliwr sydd ni'n ei galw nhw. A tua 4 gloch y diwrnod cynt, mi fydda'r hobliwrs i gyd o flaen yr offis yn cei. Sut oedden nhw'n gwybod, o methu dall, ddys i amlynyddo'n methu dall, ond be oedd yn digwydd, mi fydda capdan y llong yn gyrru telegram i wraig i ddeud bydda fo adra, fory neu yr amser ag amser. Wedyn, mi oedd y stori'n dod o either gwraig a capdan neu o'r port neu rwla. Ond oedden nhw'n gwybod gwaith y drei doc oedd gwneud llawer iawn o waith cynnal a chadw i chwarael Llanberis. Hefyd, mi o'na 2 olonga yn perthyn i'r cwmni, sef yr Elidir, yr Enid a'r Felinheli bach. Oedd wedi ei adeiladu yn bwrpasol ar gyfer cario llechi, tynnu chydig iawn o ddŵr a hold ddim rhy dyfn, yn o'n wedi pacio'r llechi reit dyn. Oedd y llonga yma yn cario o Lerpwl i'r Werddon, i Golwe, Sleigo a llefydd felly.
Life outside the working hours for the quarrymen revolved a great deal around the chapels. The chapels held all kinds of services and even held lunchtime sessions so that the quarrymen could attend. Little is known about the quarrymen's wives and indeed daughters, as slate quarrying was a male industry and was the only form of employment. Women found difficulty in gaining employment, so the only alternative was marriage.
Dechrau eisiau weithio yn o chwaral, 14.9 yn golygu, a byd yn dod o hanner. 74 pence de. 74 pence, ie. A fe eisiau, ar ôl neud 3 blynedd, £1.4 dod i £1.24 felly de. Ar ôl 3 blynedd de. Pen dwytha pan dechrau nhw'n ôl, o'n i ar gontrag ar inches fyd de. Ar inches fyd de. Mwya'm byd o'ch chi fynd, mwya'm byd o'ch chi neud de. Cofio'n had ar ôl dod o chwaral chi, llwythwr o'n had na de. Oedd yn ôl o chwaral, a yn hwyr dod yn ôl chi, 4 hogiau cael chladdu de. O'ch yn rwb da dawrau chi fyna de. Dwi'n chwilio amdanyn nhw mewn ffordd de. Wedyn mi gath y ceir gwyll a fath sy'n mynd un yn glach ddyd oes, car gwyll. Mi gath un o hynna llyn chi, a dydd a cael yn boddi de. Cofio'n haid o'ch chi gweithio yn y barrics yma de, gweithio yn y barrics yma. A oedd o'n croesi o Foel y Don de, ond fod o malldraeth yn Sir Fôn de, a croesi Foel y Don. Wedi fynd i barrics yma o cyrraedd Felinheli. Wedyn o'n nhw'n ten cychwyn o hwnna 96 de, cyrraedd o chwarae 6:45, cyrraedd i fyny de, 8 am wythnos o fod de.
Anglesey employees would set out before 3 o'clock on Monday mornings. Catching the ferry from Moyladon, sailing over the Menai Straits to catch the train from Penscoins to Llanberis. Arriving at Llanberis would signal the commencement of a trek of hundreds of metres to their humble barracks, from which they would embark on a full day's toil. Working conditions were poor at the quarry, and low wages offered little reward.
Ti'n meddwl am y hogia yma'n cael fach ddweud, oedd yn gweithio 6 mis am ddim y prentisiaeth, dim ma, yn yr hen ddyddiad. Os ti o'n i o'r inches wan, so ti, dwi'n bod ti'n gweithio Ben Gerard, o rhaid ti fod yno, 3 chwarter awr chi'n caniad i thanio, ar dydd llun, ar dydd llun. Hanner 7 o'r caniad, o ti'n mynd yno 3 chwarter i 7 i thanio, a to ddim yn barod adag yno, Cymryd awr i thanio, os ti wedi'r hogia, dod i ddall o anebyn ar yr wsos, hyd o'n nhw, cadw stef nhw trwy nos, Digon o ddŵr yn y boiler a dod awr i ti hanner y byd bora, stêm yn ei bora. Tyddo hi mewn ffordd tan ar un ochr a glo man ar ei benno. Dyna'r dan neis ni'n bora. Hanna coron o ti'n cael amdani o'n bora. Hanna coron i am gyrraedd i fyny i top. Rwy'n llun o'n pasad ag yno. A mi o'n a basis i'r chwarelwrs. Dwi'n cofio fod yn had yn y bracio. Ar y bracio yna. Codyn i fyny wrth i. Dair wagan llawn yn barod yn bora. Ar ei gwag y gwylod, Dwi'n nhw'n talu rhyw 2 cinog rwsos am gael pas i fyny,
The quarrymen had a poor diet. They ate very little and drank too much tea. The usual pattern for the men's diet consisted of bread, butter, and tea for breakfast, dinner, tea and supper. Digestive problems were responsible for 1/5 of all attendances at De Norwich Hospital. The De Norwich Hospital was built on the shores of Paran Lake back in the late 1800s, this being the second hospital established here. The first was erected many, many years previously. Between 1822 and 1969, 362 men were killed altogether. Most of these casualties were overwhelmed in rock falls. Rules for the inpatients were published in 1890, and they included that patients were to provide their own clean linen and help out in the hospital, and in exchange they were assured continuous medical care. The hospital closed its doors for the last time in 1946, and afterwards all cases were taken directly from the quarry by ambulance to the C&A Infirmary at Bangor. The Penrhyn strike of the early 1900s had a devastating effect on the whole of the North Wales economy. The demand for slates ebbed considerably. Skilled though they were, many men were forced to seek work elsewhere. Many, in fact, joined the armed forces. Sadly, August 1969 brought the closure of the quarry and closed the book on a source of income that had occupied many generations, along with the skills they possessed. As the quarrymen left for their well-earned annual holiday, not one of the 350-strong workforce were aware they would never, ever return. All that remains today are the relics of this bygone era, inherent in them the ghostly echoes of an old and redundant industrial age. Here, in the shadow of Snowdon, the spiritual heartland of Wales. Dinorwig Quarry, an image of the past in sharp contrast to the internationally acclaimed, timeless beauty and spectacle of its home, here in spectacular Snowdonia. Five years after closure, engineers were seeking sites to build a hydro-electric pumped storage scheme. They discovered this mountain, which had already been excavated for hundreds of years. What was unique was that there was a lake high above the quarry, and one at the base, perfect for a pumped storage scheme. In 1974, work began on construction. A staggering 16 kilometers of tunnels were drilled and blasted into the heart of the mountain itself. A dam had to be built up in Machlan-Mawr, which took 4 years to complete. The holding capacity of water at Machlan-Mawr had increased to 1,540 million gallons of water. The lower lake, Llyn Peris, also had to be enlarged to cater for the same amount of water falling from Machlan-Mawr. By August 1980, most of the main underground excavations had been completed, although some 2 million cubic meters of rock were excavated, and it took the equivalent of 6,000 man-hours to drill and blast. The Dinorwig project was one of the largest civil engineering projects in the whole of Europe. No less than 33 separate companies were involved in the design, construction, and supply of equipment. Dinorwig was officially opened on the 9th of May, 1984, by His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales.
I know that the siting of a giant power project like this in a national park brings certain problems with it. And I also know that many people were worried at the time about the effects that it was going to have. But I think having seen what has been achieved, and in particular what has been achieved in terms of the landscaping of the top dam wall, which I saw this morning, which I would never have known was there unless it had been pointed out to me, shows what can be done with care and concern. And I think now there is less slate waste and fewer of the grey Alps which were left by the old industries. And so, ladies and gentlemen, on the face of it, we are witnessing a victory for common sense, reasonableness, and sheer technical skill. And on that note, I'm delighted and honoured to declare open this great pumped storage project.
This project is not only a spectacular landmark in engineering skills, but also a monument to human endeavour.